right, so I'm very pleased to introduce Paul Greene. Paul Greene is chair of the Privacy and Data Security Practice Group at Harter Secrest Emery here in Rochester. Paul is a distinguished fellow of the Ponemon Institute, a certified, oops, don't do this, that's tomorrow. Ignore that, don't look behind the curtain. Okay. Paul is a distinguished fellow of Ponemon Institute, a certified information privacy professional in the U.S., and an adjunct professor at RIT. He has broad industry experience and a decade hands-on with high-profile breaches. So let's welcome Paul.
Thanks very much, Al. Well, good morning, everyone. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to start by saying how happy and thrilled I am to kind of kick things off here this year. This is my 4th year at RSS. Started coming back in 2016. So when I started coming, I came to this organization and this event to start a conversation. With my clients and out in the industry, I found a singular lack of communication. There was a lack of communication between IT and InfoSec, sometimes between InfoSec and management, between management and finance, between finance and IT, between legal, wherever that was, internal or external, concerning 2 primary things. What's an incident, and how do we respond? So I came and began talking about the complexity of laws that were out there. And lo and behold, the past 4 years, they've only gotten more complex. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But I was trying to kind of empower folks to think about what I do on a daily basis. Think about what the regulators are thinking about. Think about what legislatures are thinking about. Think about what the general public has in mind when you suffer an incident and, God forbid, when that incident becomes a reportable breach. And I was so happy with the conversations that followed with clients and others in the industry. We have such a vibrant security community here. There was great engagement, and hopefully today will spark some more thoughts. I'll be talking a little bit today about incident response and how incident response can go wrong, sometimes horribly wrong. But first, a little bit about me and a few disclaimers. 2 things. I turned 50 this year, and 2 things happened when I turned 50. I got really, really nostalgic for my teenage years, which, do the math, were back in the 1980s. And I started to really not care anymore what people thought about me. So 2 of those things are, those 2 things are reflected in my presentation a little bit here. We've got some 80s pop culture references, hence the title. I'm also a bit of a Halloween buff or freak, I guess. It's my favorite holiday of the year. For me, you know, October is not Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it's Halloween month. I'm looking forward to the end of the month. And so you know, we've got some cheesy kind of Halloween references. On to the disclaimers. The RSS made the great decision to start with the least qualified person to talk about security. The last thing you want to know from me is how to secure your system. So I rely on all of you, many of you on a daily basis with clients and with outside consultants to help me do my job. That's why these conversations that sparked from these presentations have been so key to me. They really help me do my work, because if I can't get my client the right security advice, if I can't guide their security function through the legal morass that's out there, I really can't do my job. And second, I'm of course the least interesting of all the keynote speakers. I'm neither a serial entrepreneur, nor do I have a boring company flamethrower. So hopefully you won't fall asleep during my presentation. All right, so jumping in. And lastly, of course, I'm an attorney, these slides are really busy, lugubrious. I've got 35 of them for a little less than an hour, so good luck to me to get through all this stuff. We'll see how it goes. So, what are we talking about today? Our hair-raising tale, but a ball joke, of course, hair-raising tale. We're going to be talking about the horrors of incident response, why it's such a bad thing, why it's such a risky thing in the end. We're going to talk about tales of incident response gone wrong. And another disclaimer here, these are things that we've observed in the wild. Maybe, maybe not with some of our clients. I am an attorney. Attorney-client privilege and confidentiality apply. So the names and facts have been changed to protect the innocent or guilty, I guess. So none of these stories has to do with any of my clients, although these things do happen on occasion. If these look familiar to something that's happened to you, I'm not singling you out. These kinds of things happen with other folks all the time. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how to avoid being in my presentation next year, I guess. How do you avoid falling into the incident response crypt, I guess? How do you avoid these spooky things that can happen in relation to incident response? Okay, let's talk about why incident response is such a scary thing. I'm going to talk about a number of these in more detail, but we'll start off with the tangled web. And it is indeed a tangled web. As I mentioned earlier, I started talking about the law a few years ago and how tangled that was. And then there's everything else. The kind of tangled interplay of risks can make the actual incident the least of your concerns. When I'm working an incident with a client, quite often the incident is resolved in a day, 2 days, inside of a week if it's really bad. The incident response stuff lasts weeks, months, years, potentially thereafter. You can be shackled with an incident around your organizational ankle for much longer than it took to either identify, contain, or respond to the incident. And why is that? Well, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different laws out there. We all have potentially 50 regulators or more to answer to. The regulators are falling over themselves to create new rules. With 50 sets of rules, they change all the time. We'll talk a bit about that more to come. There's the 24-hour news cycle. What's the danger there? It's a beast that needs to be fed, right? You need content to fill all of that time, all of those venues, and there are risks that arise from that news cycle. We're all fed up with and equally numb to incident response, right? Even though we're security folks, or you are at least, you know how prevalent these things are. But as people, as individuals, you're probably fed up with the bad security practices that are out there, especially in relation to your data. Think about how the hoi polloi thinks of it. They think that we all in our organization should be doing more to protect data. And they really don't want to hear excuses. They really don't want to hear excuses. And the terrible kind of dilemma we're all faced in is this is the only situation I can think of where you've been the victim of a federal crime, but somehow you're the bad guy, right? If your bank gets robbed, well, hey, there's FDIC insurance, so you're kind of protected there. But nobody says to the bank you should have bought a better lock, or your security guards should have been asleep, or you should have done something to prevent that theft. In relation to a theft, tables get turned. Really, I can only think of one situation, maybe ECMC recently, where the breached entity was treated more as a victim than the wrongdoer. The newest thing on the block, of course, maybe not so new, but on all of our plates potentially, is privacy. And here's where I really feel for all of you. When my clients come to me and say, hey, how do we comply with GDPR? How do we comply with CCPA? How do we comply with, for example, the NIST privacy framework that's coming down the pike? They almost invariably connect me to the information security function internally. And they expect all of you to know the privacy rules, which is potentially a completely different discipline. There's a Venn diagram where they overlap. But there's a complete lack of understanding of how privacy and security relate, and more of that is ending up on your plates. And there are great expectations placed on security professionals to really be experts in that regard, among other things. There are the unknowns. You peel back the layers of the onion in incident response, and you cry a little bit more each time. We'll look at that a little bit more. And then there's this last piece. Does your organization really understand what an incident is, how that gets escalated to a potential breach, and what incident response means to the organization? Of course, it's not an IT issue. It's not just an InfoSec issue. It's an organizational risk issue. Okay, jumping into a few of these in more detail. So who are your regulators? This, again, is the tried and true speech I've given for a number of years now, but there are a lot of them. Federal, state, and local. New York City, until later this month, has its own data breach notification law. It's going to be preempted by the SHIELD Act, which we'll talk about. But folks, it's really hard as a political matter to lose when you're regulating in relation to information security. What's to lose? You get to be tough on crime, tough on information security, you're protecting individuals. Why not create more rules? Why not create more complexity? And just the simple fact that there are rules out there and a proliferation of rules, they change on a regular basis. I do this for a living. Every single time that we have a potential breach for a client, we have to go through and look at the laws each time to see what's changed, what's pending, and what the relevant administrative agencies have said in that state about how they think the law applies. The level of complexity is really just beyond comprehension. You may have industry-based regulators, of course, PCI DSS, if you accept payment cards. Other certain industry standards are out there. Your customers, your vendors, your business partners, and your contracts. Of course, you can have security requirements, notification requirements that apply to you. How well your organizations have you blended your legal requirements with your contractual requirements? Rare is the client that I see that knows exactly what's in every single contract, especially for service providers, concerning how they need to report up the chain to their end customers. I mentioned GDPR internationally, HIPAA in Canada. We've got international regulators looking at us, even here in Rochester, New York. And then there's everyone else. As these laws and regulations are developing, private rights of action are becoming more and more common. Fortunately, here in New York, they're not really a thing yet. But they're popping up. And what's a private right of action? It's when you and I and aspiring plaintiffs' attorneys can sue to enforce the law that perhaps the Attorney General may not otherwise enforce. So you've got all of these other folks to answer to, and then a bunch of folks whose business model is to put together large lawsuits to sue you and others like you in relation to security and privacy issues. Okay. Why is this a problem? Why is that tangled web of regulations a problem? Well, let's look at the SHIELD Act, just passed here in New York, passed in July. It does two things. It modifies 899AA, which is the data breach notification statute here in New York, and it adds B, which I'll talk about in a second. AA they were trying to modify for years. Came online in the early 2000s in response to the California data breach notification law. And you may recall it had a very narrow definition of information that led to a breach. Name or some other identifier plus something more sensitive like social security number, driver's license number, account number, etc. As we all know, it's rare when that's the only stuff that's compromised. In fact, it's rare when that's the stuff that's compromised. Most breaches, quote unquote, that we deal with other kinds of stuff. Things that don't include a social security number, driver's license, or account number. And the SHIELD Act was meant to remedy that. It added the two definitions to that term private information that can give rise to a breach, specifically biometric information, account information without an access code, if you can otherwise use that account to the person's detriment. And then lastly, username and password for online account access. So three things they added to kind of modernize the law. They went as far as some states, further than others, but not far as a few states that are out there. So they kind of added to the complexity. They went to kind of a middle road, chose a definition that some other folks are doing, but certainly moved the goalposts a little bit. And they also wanted to deal with this issue of non-reported breaches, breaches that didn't get reported to the AG, specifically under HIPAA. So I mentioned breaches that wouldn't get reported. Under HIPAA, it's EPHI that you report in relation to. Of course, an EPHI can be anything in relation to the provision, payment for medical care, or any current or future diagnosis of an individual. Well, many of those breaches wouldn't get reported to the AG. And the Attorney General wasn't too happy about that. Why? Because the Attorney General has concurrent jurisdiction to enforce the relevant HIPAA rules. And if the feds aren't going to enforce against you, that's something that the AG can do. So that's more complexity. That's another regulator under the same set of rules that you may have to answer to. The feds, HHS and OCR, may think that you did a good job in relation to an incident. The AG, under the SHIELD Act, may not. And it's certainly her current purview to think that. She has the authority to do that. And this means that she is now going to get notice of every otherwise non-reportable HIPAA breach that happens in her state. So it kind of adds to that tangled web. What does 899BB do? 899BB, for the first time, adds a requirement for reasonable security standards for anyone who owns or licenses personal data concerning a New Yorker. So this statute went from a doing business statute, only applying to folks doing business in New York, that's most of us maybe, to anyone in the world who has my private information. It's a possession statute. It's like a drug statute. If you have it, you're guilty, right? If you have it, the AG has authority over you. A few states, about a dozen of them, have these kind of possession thresholds in their jurisdiction, and New York has now become one of them. And lastly, they tried to do a good job by carving out HIPAA and Gramm-Leach-Bliley and Part 500, saying, if you're subject to those other rules, well then, and if you're compliant with those other rules, then you're a compliant regulated entity. You automatically meet this reasonable safeguards standard. The problem is, what's compliance? Compliance is a snapshot. It's a moment in time, right? You're only compliant until you're not. And if you suffer an incident, God forbid a reportable breach, you probably weren't in compliance at that point. So I see very little value in this caveat under 899BB personally. It's a great move trying to limit overlap, but in trying to limit overlap, they've created more potential. So that's the issue with the regulators and the tangled web that we deal with. The news cycle. When you have an incident, quite often it gets out. I'm actually surprised by how many incidents don't get out. Every time we work an incident and a reportable breach, we always monitor the press to see if it gets out. The minority of ours actually have gotten out in the past, very surprising to me. Because the press needs to feed itself, they need to comment. And what does the press do? Don't know if there are any representatives of the press here, but in our view, certainly, they don't always get the facts right. But another way, the press always gets it wrong. What you want them to say, even if what you want to say is 100% correct, is not what's going to be in the paper, is not going to be what's online. Regardless of how consistent your messaging is, regardless of how good your story is, it's not going to get out the way that you want it to. And if you don't speak to them, someone else will. Who's that going to be? It's going to be an employee, potentially. If you don't communicate with your employees well, it's going to be a disgruntled ex-employee. It's going to be potentially a patient if you're in healthcare. It's a customer. You may actually spark the discussion yourself, and we'll discuss that in a moment. Local stories can blossom across the interwebs, of course. We see that all the time when some local newspaper story gets picked up by Crane's Healthcare or some other outlet reporting a breach that's a month old. You thought died, but then its ugly head rears up again. And then I talked about who we think are victims or not, but images can speak more loudly than words. And here's kind of a little tick of mine, I guess. I spent a lot of time, unfortunately, probably too much time, looking for these kinds of images in the internet. First lesson, if you can take anything from this talk today, don't do this. Don't put a sign on your door saying your computers are down. If you haven't thought about how to deal with this, please go back and think about what's right for your organization. I can't imagine this would be the right way. In my book, this is certainly the wrong way. Got a little selection here. This one's very nice. It's probably the lowest profile sign I've seen. You know, they cut it down into about a third of the size of a piece of paper, put an exclamation mark at the end for emphasis, right by the door handle so it's easy to see. Please don't do that. This was not Genesee County, New York, Genesee County in Michigan. They suffered a ransomware attack. They made their sign orange so the reporters could find it. Those are the reporters that you can see mirrored in the door right there, taking a picture of the sign. Now they're in a tough spot, right? The treasurer's office, they've got to take money, maybe pay money, who knows? They've got to notify people. Maybe this was the only way, but query whether they thought about that this was the only way. Maybe if they made that decision before the incident. The worst time to make a decision about how to communicate with the public is while your hair's on fire, another ball joke, I guess. You should certainly deal with that beforehand. And don't use orange paper, it shows up very well. Okay, this one's great. So you get wheeled in on a gurney from the ambulance and you find that the emergency department has no IT facilities and there are significant delays. If that doesn't kill you, maybe you want to get up and walk out if you can. This is, of course, the absolute worst way inside of healthcare to let folks know. You know, the good news about healthcare, and what we've seen in relation to healthcare breaches, is that people care. The providers really care. And the best incident response we've seen in healthcare is when people actually get together. When all the people, all the finance people whose computers are down and can't do any work, are there communicating to patients, are there running prescriptions across different floors. You get them engaged, and you may not have to have this kind of impersonal and very potentially detrimental communication. And this one's kind of near to my heart. DLA Piper, 4,200 attorneys worldwide. One of the biggest law firms out there suffered a terrible incident. Their computer systems were down for quite a long time. This is how they communicated to their users, not to turn on their computers. I don't know which office this is. I don't know what that guy's doing in the background, applying for a job and quitting. I don't know. But this may be the only way. Probably was an effective way. How do you get all the remote people to comply? Maybe it's not an issue with remote people since they're telling them not to turn on their computers. But in any event, you know, certainly lawyers too were susceptible to this. And query again when they decided, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's use a whiteboard to tell everybody not to log on to their system when we have an incident. Privacy. Okay, let's talk about privacy a bit. From 2003 to 2018, security was all the rage. We had early on the HIPAA security rule, the GLB safeguards rule. We're often rolling with sectoral regulation in the United States. Because there was no one federal standard, the states jumped in and we had 50 data breach notification statutes come online, average of 3 per year or so. Now, of course, privacy is all the rage. Why? 2 reasons. GLBA and, GDPR, the other G, and Cambridge Analytica. Okay? So GDPR passed in 2016. When the news broke here, we all thought, oh gosh, those crazy Europeans. Here's socialism at its worst. They're regulating data down to the nth degree. That's going to kill industry in the EU. It's never going to come over here. Let's avoid it like the plague. It's a really terrible thing. Became effective in 2018, and lo and behold, a lot of us found out that we were subject to it, and hey, we begrudgingly started compliance efforts. And in the interim, Cambridge Analytica happened. And the one thing they teach you in law school, one among many things perhaps, is bad facts make bad law. What did Cambridge Analytica do? It sparked the discussions in California in relation to the California Consumer Privacy Act. And lo and behold, in the span of 7 days, the California legislature proposed, probably didn't read, debated, not much, and passed the California Consumer Privacy Act, referencing Cambridge Analytica in the preface to the act, noting specifically that that was a trigger for what made the legislature move. So privacy is all the rage, and how does privacy relate to security? Certainly in relation to confidentiality and availability of the data, perhaps also integrity. There is a lot of overlap. And again, privacy professionals around the world are being asked to understand these laws that are coming online. We're all doing it for the first time, by the way, but they expect all of you to be experts on how your confidentiality controls play into security regulation. And CCPA is a good example. They include a private right of action in CCPA for what? Not for privacy breaches, but for security breaches. So they built this whole security scheme and they said, oh yeah, if you have a breach, if you fall down in relation to security, everyone can sue you. So keep in mind they're keeping that private right of action on the table as these things develop. Unknown. So data sucks, right? It's everywhere. It can cause risk. And what I do, the greatest amount of time and effort and cost is spent in looking through unstructured data sources for reportable data. You tell me that your email's been hacked, I tell you, well, we're going to have to load the relevant accounts into an e-discovery platform and spend weeks looking through them, depending on how long they are, to make sure we know exactly what's in there. There are automated tools, but automated tools can get it wrong. Hand review can get it wrong, so if anyone ever tells you that a law firm going through your affected unstructured sources one by one is going to be 100% guarantee you're going to find everything, that's entirely wrong. So you only know how bad things are after you start to, again, peel back the layers of that onion. And invariably, I can't tell you how many times I hear a client tell me, oh, there's no PII on that server. We're fine. And then you ask a couple questions, and of course, there probably is some PII on that server. Or perhaps the definition of PII that they were working with is outdated, given those 50 laws that we had. Or maybe they just didn't fully understand what was on that server. Okay, so now we're on to chapter 2. Got about 7 kind of cautionary tales here, all with a simply little Halloween theme, I guess. And the first one is the blind but highly regulated fact. Subtitle: A Bad Case of Regulatory Myopia. Let's take a look. Okay, so we've got a HIPAA-covered entity. They're regulated. They've got the HIPAA privacy and security rules to deal with. Got 2,000 and more health records that were compromised. Name, address, diagnosis, social security number, clearly EPHI, clearly reportable. Learn a little bit more about the incident. It was a cloud-based email compromise. They didn't have MFA on 0365, so the bad guy got in very easily, and unfortunately, only compromised one account. When the entity discovered this, they changed the credentials right away, got in forensics, have found no evidence of further compromise. Whew. Crisis averted, right? Well, you know, in that email account, there was a spreadsheet containing about 175 employee and retiree SSNs. The entity was focused on the HIPAA privacy and security rules, not so much on the other data breach reporting statutes, other security regulations that could apply, and may not have locked down HR information appropriately. What happened? They reported to OCR within 60 days, went on that website. You know, we all have those websites now. That's great news, right? Well, we'll see that the kind of accessibility of reporting can create risks in and of itself. But here, they reported to OCR, so 60 days, they're good to go. They closed incident response. Didn't do anything else. What did they create for themselves here? They created this time bomb. So two things were reportable outside of HIPAA here. One, the employee data. I kind of gave that one away, right? So under New York law, if you lose name and social security number under any state law, regardless of where your retirees are, Florida, California, wherever, that's a reportable breach. It now becomes a breach. It's no longer an incident. It's reportable. Okay? The EBHI breach was also reportable. And so you need to give notice to the relevant state agencies, and depending on the state, less than a majority of states require state agency notice. And by not reporting, the entity created this time bomb. It ticks away every single day until the AG learns about it. The statute of limitations for Attorney General action under the new SHIELD Act is interesting. It's 3 years from discovery by the AG, or 3 years from reporting, whichever is later. Here they didn't report, so whenever the AG discovers this, she has 3 years to enforce. Or, if the entity took efforts to hide the incident, it's 6 years. I'm sorry, yes, it's 6 years. And it can be extended if the entity took efforts to hide the incident. And here we see entities all the time make that risk analysis. Should we report? We were late. Let's let the dog slide. It's not a big issue. Maybe we won't let the AG know. Maybe we won't report if we already did under HIPAA. Certainly a bad idea. It's difficult to come clean sometimes if you've missed a reporting deadline. But if you don't, you have that ticking time bomb, and regulatory action can come really at any moment. And where can it come from? Well, think about movement in your InfoSec, in your IT department. Think about other employees who may leave. Certainly whistleblowers are an issue. OCR, breaches reported to OCR are on the website, so AGs can just flick through that to see who is breached and ask questions. The information's out there, certainly, and especially if it gets in the press, there's risk. Okay, no good breach goes unpunished. So this is the only one that doesn't really involve my personal experience. The facts were not changed here. Let's see if you can figure out who this was. The date may be a giveaway. Breach was announced September of 17. There was a lawsuit within 12 hours. The breach was announced on the East Coast after the close of business, close of the markets, and follow the sun out in the District of Oregon. By the end of the day, it was around 11-something, 11:45 at night. The first lawsuit was filed, first class action lawsuit was filed in relation to this breach. The AG investigations began within about 24 hours, very quickly. There was also a kind of ornery tweet from the New York Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman at the time, also within 24 hours. We'll talk about that in a moment. There were cases from the SEC. There was an FTC investigation. There were state investigations and other regulatory actions. And then the Department of Financial Services here in New York. This is astounding to me. I can't talk enough about this issue. The Department of Financial Services, within 9 business days, proposed rules to go and get jurisdiction over that breached entity. So, I'm not sure how many lawyers are in the room, but certainly, to start with from the beginning, administrative agencies like DFS are supposed to enforce the law, not make the law. They can only create regulations based on something called an enabling statute. If the legislature gives them power, they can go and do it. No legislature has ever said to DFS, you can go and get power over that kind of entity. Rather, DFS said, we think that entity kind of falls within our purview, and we're going to create regulations to go out and regulate that entity. 9 business days, they proposed Part 201 to go and get consumer credit reporting agencies. This was the Equifax breach, of course. There was some pushback from the industry, but these regulations passed and are now in the books. So the lesson here, again, bad facts can make bad law. Whatever your industry is, it's certainly conceivable that something bad enough happens in the industry, something bad enough happens to you, that a regulator who may not have power over you today changes the law tomorrow and goes and tries to get power over you in the future. What's the problem with the incident response here? It has to do with the tweet. Okay, so everyone remember, Equifax came out, they gave notice of the breach, and then they said, hey, if you were affected, you can get our Equifax ID Theft Protection Credit Monitor, right? And there was a term in there, an alternative dispute resolution term, an arbitration clause. All indications are that was in their standard terms and conditions. Of course it was. enter into a contract with the Consumer Credit Reporting Agency. They don't sue them, you can arbitrate. Well, it was weird because they were the one who was breached, right? And folks were worried that they couldn't sue Equifax, so the AG tweeted, said, I don't like that, and they took that term out. So after Equifax, not only do we need to look at those 50 regulators, not only do we need to follow all this complexity, we need a good and active Twitter account to follow our regulators. Okay, next one. The satanic spreadsheet. You've already seen one of the spreadsheets, here's another one. So we've got a financial institution with a cloud-based technology stack. They moved to the cloud because they said, hey, you know what? We can't do this really well in-house. We're going to hire someone who can do security really well. We're going to go to a cloud-based solution. And we're going to really kick the tires in relation to the security, and we're all set. Well, Office 365 again, and spreadsheets again, and SharePoint, interestingly enough. So they share client information via spreadsheets, etc. We've got the Dell functionality on, the kind of hot kind of dashboard that pops up where you can see recently used files, right? Who's going to use that? Well, the user's going to use that, and also the bad guy, maybe, to kind of give away the point of the story. So maybe some of those spreadsheets with client data are showing up on the Dell function. They've highly leveraged themselves with structural data. They've housed all of their client data in databases, but again, it gets pulled out in spreadsheets. Why? Usability, right? Folks want it, and why? Maybe upper management. Upper management wants to see a spreadsheet because that's what they know. They don't really know how to use the database. They don't know how to pull a report from that system. Now, if they do pull a report, they may just store it in their email, for example. The database is accessed, protected by MFA, of course. 365 compromised, not protected by MFA, and they determined, similar to our blind bat before, that there was no risk to client data because the relevant databases weren't compromised. We see this all the time. Not only is there a focus on primary regulators, there's a focus on your protection too much to a great extent. Again, folks that leverage structured data may not be taking into account what their users do with it and how they take it out of that structured realm, thereby creating further risk. So if you can tell I kind of hate spreadsheets, or maybe I love them as job security because we're always looking for spreadsheets. When I do that e-discovery deep dive into your email boxes or other unstructured data sources that are compromised, we're looking for file extensions in the first instance. I want to find the spreadsheet. The Word document, okay, but unlikely that's going to be a big trove of client information. Spreadsheets are really gold when it comes to determining whether a breach is occurred. The telltale report. Publicly traded company, B2B company, service provider, right? So they process information, customer information for large clients. They hire a top-notch security firm on retainer. Awesome. I wish more of my clients would do that. It's not a plug for security firms here, but if anyone, if my clients could go out and get help they need, certainly on retainer, I think that's an awesome thing to do. The company works closely with that firm. They establish a top-notch information security program, an incident response plan, another little smiley face. Again, if more of my clients would do that, that would be great. Many of them have policies and procedures, but not a program. And what should the program look like? It should look like the regulation, right? Because who are you writing the program for? The regulator, right? Graham Leach Bliley says, have an information security program. Part 500 says, have an information security program. Similar requirement under HIPAA. And if you're not following the requirements of the regulation, you may be doing yourself a disservice when it comes time to translate that to the regulator. Okay, the network's compromised. A little frowny face there, but you know, that happens to all of us, very, very common. What happens next? They set up internal controls, maybe they segmented the network, who knows what they did, but they were successful in keeping the bad guy from accessing those crown jewels. The bad guys couldn't get at that B2B customer data, the end consumer data that they were processing for their B2B customers. Good news, smiley face. The customers ain't happy. They're up in arms about the breach. You're my AI provider. You're my processor. You had an incident and you reported to me into the contract, and I want to know, is my data safe? Now you've got 100,000 customers breathing down your neck, yelling and screaming in email, wanting to know exactly what happened. Okay, that's not a good position to be in, hence the little frowny face. The security firm does forensics, does it very well. They create a forensic report, work with outside counsel to determine there was no compromise of that B2B data. Great, awesome. Our clients can rest at ease, I guess. In-house counsel at the company wants to put out the customer relations fire that's occurring and shares that copy of the forensic report with the end customers. Smiley face or frowny face? Hands up. Smiley faces? Anybody smiley face? Frowny face? It's a cautionary tale, of course, it's frowny face, right? So, what's the problem here? The problem, one, is you may not have another option. In order to keep doing business with your customers, you may have to open the curtain and show them everything that happened. The bad news is, if you have a report that goes through counsel, one, attorney-client privilege can apply to that report. And two, by sharing it with others, so we'll go into this a little bit further down the line, by sharing it with others, you can blow that privilege. So whatever is in that report can be as bad as you can imagine. Maybe the segmentation worked, but the organization fell down in relation to all the other controls mandated by the WISP. That can now be used by plaintiffs' attorneys, that can now be used by regulators in relation to enforcement actions. Even if you have an NDA with your end customers, say, hey, let's put an NDA in place, I'll show you my forensic report. If you don't tell anybody else, it's no longer protected from discovery, from use in an action against you. We've seen this in a number of cases. Also keep in mind in relation to a credit card breach, if any of you have gone through this under the PCI DSS and the credit card rules, you need to hire a PFI, a PCI forensic investigator. Who do they work for? They work for the card brand. And so that report can't be privileged, regardless of whether they're working with your counsel or not in that regard. That has to be shared with the card brand, usually, sometimes with your processor. So however bad that report is, and they can be bad, that can be used against you, and they often are in class action litigations. As a litigator, that would be the first things I would ask for is show me the rules, show me your WISP, show me your incident response plan, and then show me your forensic report. Why? I want to know, did you follow your WISP, did you follow your incident response plan, and did your forensic investigator say anything to the contrary? Next one. To be or not to be. This may be familiar for those of you who have heard me speak before on these issues, but we'll go into it a little bit more this time around. So Bill, our friend Bill from accounting, he turns on his computer Monday morning, ransomware locks Greene. Okay, happens quite a bit. He emails Samantha, I guess on his phone, right? Because his endpoint is locked, his laptop's locked down, so he emails on his phone. Emails Samantha, the security engineer, to say, I think my computer's been hacked. It puts in the reline, security breach. Okay. Samantha forwards this to the CIO, sends it to the CFO, who sends it to the CEO, copies the board. By the end of the day, we have 50, and that's probably a low number, 50 separate emails, all with that same security breach subject line, and asking everything you can imagine about the breach. Why were we breached? How could this happen? What's the scope of the breach? Had we have insurance to cover the breach? What information was subject to access in relation to the breach? How's this going to affect the company? Gosh, I can't believe we've been breached, etc. And this we see quite often. Board member sends back an email, an order email, saying, oh my gosh, I knew this was going to happen. I've been warning you all for years and years and years that we should prepare for a catastrophic breach just like this. So I get emails from clients about security incidents, and very, very often the reline is security breach, or data breach, or cyber breach, or something breach. The good news is, and we'll talk again about attorney-client privilege in a moment, once they email me, communications can be protected, or email whoever counsel is. Emails can be protected, but those 50 emails beforehand aren't protected. And I grew up as a young litigation associate in New York City, back when e-discovery wasn't e-discovery, it was just discovery. So we'd have a room, 150 boxes if it was a small case, paper you'd go through, mind-numbingly boring. What did you want? You wanted the emails. You wanted the communications back and forth because you knew they were going to slip up, you knew they were going to say something you could use. You'd really look for the privileged emails because, gosh, did they blow that? Can we get a view into what they're talking to their attorney? It was before the rules changed in New York. But you're looking for the emails, and you're looking for the relines. Now, with e-discovery, we're searching for the relines. We're searching for the things that say security breach, that say incident, that say, oh my God, searching for expletives to see if we can find some juicy commentary from the InfoSec department as to exactly what went on. So, the lesson here, breach, it's a legal term. Don't use the term internally until someone with a law degree in malpractice insurance has told you that a breach has occurred. Or at least, if you've built muscle memory and you're handling the things internally, define the characteristics that need to be met before you declare a breach internally. Okay, who's going to pay? XYZ Corp gets cyber insurance, awesome. IT goes and vets 3 different vendors, also awesome. Goes into their experience, capacity, industry, chooses the vendor with the best fit, that's great. They've got them on retainer, ready to go. They've got the 800 number. Everything's all set. They go through a risk assessment, build up a lot of institutional knowledge with that vendor, develops an IRP, drills the IRP. What did they forget to do? They forgot to ask who's going to pay. So about maybe 30-35% of the insurance policies out there have no choice of vendor. So you can go through this whole process, get yourself preferred pricing, and get yourself preferred SLA in relation to incident response, and you may not be able to use that person. You may have to get someone else in. And culture, why does culture matter? It's a big deal. If you get in a forensic investigator who doesn't match with your internal IT culture, there may be a lot of defensiveness, right? IT InfoSec built the program. Maybe the program failed in some way. Maybe it was a user. But there's going to be a lot of this going on. And if you don't build up a good relationship with the forensic vendor, it can really harm incident response. So if you have information, if you have cyber risk insurance, it's very important to ask who's going to pay. And it's fine using the panel providers. We may have some here today. But you need to ask that question in the first instance. Okay, how to get noticed. Smaller FI suffers a compromise. Compromise is clear, but we don't yet know what data is at issue. But I mentioned those online reporting portals. They jump the gun and say, hey, we're going to report. We're going to report in all the states that we can find in relation to our users. We're going to let the authorities know we're going to do the right thing. They get an almost immediate response from the regulators. On the invitation for a conference call from the regulators, there are 12 of them and 4 attorneys on that call. How comfortable is it to have a call with your regulatory agency with 12 regulators, 4 or few more attorneys? It's not very comfortable at all. The regulators are really tuned into these issues. When you report, they do follow up. A few years ago, I would say, gosh, they're never going to follow up. They take it out of their own way. Nothing against the regulators, but budget, just personnel issues. They don't have the manpower to deal with the number of breaches that are going to be coming in. They follow up. And certain regulators follow up with a vengeance, some with 12 people on your first call. So the lesson here, you don't yet know what data is at issue. You don't know if there's a reportable breach. You may have to report it in the back end, and that's fine. But one of the greatest cost drivers, one of the greatest complexity drivers in incident response can be notification too soon. Okay. I may have 9 minutes left, and I may have a whole bunch of slides, so we'll see what happens here. So how to get out of here? Here's my few more 80s references. Who are you going to call? 1984 Ghostbusters, awesome movie, right? Who do you engage internally? Who do you engage externally? Ask those questions beforehand. Shall we play a game? Reference anyone? Anyone?
War games.
War games, right, 1984. What's the relevance that War games has to cybersecurity regulation?
They hacked into Whopper.
What's that?
They hacked into Whopper.
Oh, so the hacking incident that occurred there, I'm looking at the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. War Games is the only 1980s movie that's cited in a federal cybersecurity law. The Congress said, hey, that's a valid depiction of what can happen to our infrastructure. Let's create a law, which they did 2 years later, making it a federal crime to hack into a protected computer. So thanks to Edward Broderick, we had the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Who's the boss? Tony Danza. I don't know why I included that, but you need to know who's got authority in relation to incident response before you jump into it. Okay, if you make the wrong call, what's the worst that can happen? All of this, right? You need to determine, as an organization, who you need to call, in what order, what makes the most sense to you. We're going to get into the issue of determining your risk appetite in a moment, but all of that is extremely important. It depends who you're going to call. And again, your risk tolerance, the last bullet here, is probably the most important issue here. Your pre-existing relationships are going to matter, your incident response plan. If you have a plan that says call X, make sure that's the right person or organization to call. Because again, regulators and plaintiffs' attorneys are going to be looking at why you didn't call X and why you called Y instead, for example. When to escalate. So figure out both internally and externally how you escalate in the incident response plan. We see quite a few incident response plans that really get mired in the detail. And why? Because the incident response plans are often written for good reason by the information security function. And they don't take into account 2 things from time to time in our experience. They don't take into account the importance of flexibility. And they don't take into account if anyone else can understand the incident response plan. Because it needs to be something that is digestible, enforceable, executable by the rest of the organization. If they can't understand it, if it's too mired in the details, then it's never going to work. So I mentioned structure and flexibility. They seem to be at odds with one another. You want structure, so you can tell a regulator or plaintiff's attorney, yeah, follow the NIST framework in this regard. Or we do our incident response in this manner because of this reason. You don't want to be creating an ad hoc incident response plan and defending it because, hey, you think it's the best way to do it. That's going to be a longer conversation with your regulator, with the plaintiff's attorney, with the judge. A structure can be very helpful. Structure can kill you in the end. You need flexibility because incidents are all different. If you say you always escalate in this fashion, you have an exception that makes you escalate in that fashion, that can create risk and get you outside of your plan. And some questions to answer. How do you escalate? What are the triggers? Whom do you engage both internally and externally? All important questions to ask. How are you going to escalate? For example, if that email's down, do you have a secure alternate route? I hate texting, getting texts from my clients during a breach happens all the time. My phone blows up. Why? Because they don't have a separate secure channel to send information to me. Texting, of course, is not secure. May not be protective of the attorney-client privilege. In relation to internal discussions, I don't want to be sending sensitive email to their Gmail account. So how are you going to discuss these issues? Are you going to call the 800 number on your insurance policy? Yes, you should if it tells you to. But keep in mind, the folks on the other end of that line, you're not sure who they are, when they'll call back, how they're going to engage, what fit they're going to have with your company. There are benefits in dealing with panel providers, both security and law. Let's look at those. They're very experienced. They do very good work. They've got great visibility, but it's commoditized work. They get just a fraction of their hourly rate usually to do the work. And so there are clearance pressures, there are staffing pressures. They're going to get their A team. Their C team may be very good, but do you want an A team? Those are questions you need to ask beforehand. Maybe you need a big name because this is a big breach. That's fine. But you want to ask those questions beforehand in relation to incident response planning. Using your own vendor, that scenario where we had the incident response retainer. Hey, I want to use my own vendor. What's the problem? If you need approval from your carrier, that can take time. And most of the forms out there are choice with consent, meaning that you have choice, but you have to get the carrier's consent in advance to use them. And consent can take time. They want to go back and forth. They want to see the SOW with the vendor. You can lose a week getting a vendor approved, and that can fail. Sometimes you may not get the vendor approved. So maybe you're naked in relation to that cost. Maybe you're covering that cost yourself, even though you've gone and paid for cybersecurity insurance. What do we do? Well, attorney-client privilege, as I mentioned, protects everything that is discussed in relation to an incident. The 5 elements are there. If any of those elements are gone, the privilege is blown. We've seen what happens when confidentiality is gone. Your terminology can be fatal, but it may not matter in the end. Once you have attorney-client privilege applied, what terminology you use? You call it a breach, call it an incident, call it a ham sandwich, it doesn't matter. If you have attorney-client privilege, it can't be used against you. Terminology is key. This is what we do. Long story short, we coordinate. It's called a breach coach for a reason. We don't do any of this stuff. We help the great folks, the great vendors and support folks who are out there help you in relation to a breach. We help coordinate, help communicate, help translate quite often between the various arms of incident response. We don't fix the problem. We don't know anything that you don't tell us. And we're not an insurance policy that there's not going to be bad things that happen later on. Law enforcement. So again, long story short, I've got 2 slides on law enforcement. If you'll see, there's more in the good column than the bad column. So takeaway, my view, it's a good thing to engage law enforcement. And why? Because it's the right thing to do. Law enforcement can't do their job unless we tell them what's going on. I've never advised a client not to inform law enforcement. I've had clients who decided not to inform law enforcement. Why? Because sometimes they can't catch the bad guy. Sometimes it may be a futile exercise, at least from the breached entity's view. Keep in mind, though, they're doing good work. They're starting to get extradition. They're starting to actually prosecute against some of these bad guys, especially Capital One, folks who brag about it and live in the United States. So law enforcement can be key, but you want to decide how and when you do that before you enter into incident response. Risk appetite. Let's take ransomware as an example. Are you going to pay? No, we're never going to pay. I hear that all the time. We're never going to pay. And then that legacy server can't come up and they ask, how much is the ransom? So invariably, even with a client that says they don't want to pay, I always want folks working in parallel. I want the security professional or the ransomware resolution vendor working in parallel with the threat actor to keep that avenue open, because you never know when you're going to need that door. But you need to decide beforehand, what's the pain level? What am I willing to live with? I'm willing to go without X, Y, and Z, but not A, B, or C. Because it's terrible to decide in the heat of the moment what to do, and it also takes time to decide if you're going to pay. If you have a board, it may take you up to a week to get their approval. They're not going to understand things, and you're going to have to bring them up to speed, so that can create delay. Who's the boss? Okay, so it can't stop with IT or InfoSec, of course. You got to engage relevant stakeholders from the outset in all of these elements that I note here. And too many bosses on the IRT is worse than too few. If the CEO is on your incident response team, is the CFO, who's the incident response leader, going to be looking over his or her shoulder saying, is that okay? It's terrible decision making, right? You want people who have the power and the wherewithal to make the decision and are going to be able to live with making a bad decision. Because there are terrible decisions made in relation to incident response, and we're going to have those. We can't be looking over our shoulder, otherwise none of the hard decisions will be made. And what about backups, right? So ransomware quite often hits over a holiday weekend. Where are these folks? Is there a pandemic? Do we have a snowstorm? Are they in the Bahamas? Can we get access to the folks who actually have the wherewithal to make the right decision? And budget. Are you planning on an annual basis for incident response? Because it's going to happen, right? Do you have it in your IT or InfoSec budgets to run a drill, to actually deal with these issues, to buy the things you need to buy in relation to incident response? Okay, right at my time, 3 final thoughts. Words matter. Terminology. I know I beat that dead horse too much, but terminology really does matter. Folks are out there looking at what you say in relation to incident response. Make sure you have the terminology down. Make sure you agree on the terminology internally. Your contracts can have different terminology. Sometimes incident is a dirty word. Sometimes your contracts say you've got to notify folks of an incident. So folks are trained to the event word, which is a bit too wishy-washy in my view, but who knows. So you got to know the right terminology to use. You have to drill your internal communications. There are 2 things that I always hear from employees or in relation to employees when there's an incident. The first thing they ask is, what about my data? What about me? Have I been affected? The second thing they ask is, how can I help? So drilling those communications, knowing how to get over the first hurdle to get at that engagement level is key. Don't go it alone. Internally and externally, there are folks that can help, and there are folks that should be involved. It is a team sport, incident response. If it's only being handled by a select few in your organization, I think you should determine whether that's really appropriate. And folks like me aren't going away soon. I hopefully have a fair amount of job security in this field. There will be legal risk arising from incident response. People are saying, isn't there going to be a federal law on incident response or on breach notification? Well, I think they've got a few other fish to fry currently. I don't think anytime soon we're going to see folks come together and agree on a federal breach response standard. And if they do, the states are going to fight back. You think California is going to give up the CCPA and a private right of action in relation to security just because the feds make a law? We haven't seen a preemptive law in the U.S. yet on these issues, and I doubt we will soon. Okay, so I'm 1 minute over. Thank you very much. It's been, oh, great. Thanks. So 5 minutes for questions if there are any questions. Yes, Richard. Sure. The question was right to be forgotten. So back in the privacy realm, they all expect you to know exactly what to do in relation to privacy rules. What about the right to be forgotten? First of all, reports of the right to be forgotten have been greatly exaggerated. They exist, but there are limits, right? So there was the Google decision just recently that said, okay, well, Google had to forget the person in the EU, but not in search results outside of the EU. That kind of circumscribed the GDPR right to be forgotten. But, it's still out there. And then CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, that has a right to be forgotten. And invariably with these new rules, there's incorrect reporting. Right? People are saying, oh my gosh, there's an absolute right to be forgotten under CCPA. Don't you believe it? Currently, the way the law stands now, it's in relation to data collected from the consumer. So for CCPA compliance, if you're able to tag data collected from the consumer, then you can appropriately figure out what you need to delete if there's a deletion request. Also, I lost count, there's at least 7, maybe 9 exceptions to the deletion request. So just like incident response, the last time you want to be figuring out if an exception applies to a DSAR, a data subject access request, is when you get that DSAR. Someone says, forget me, oh my God, what do I do? You need to develop the process, drill the process beforehand, and figure out when am I going to rely on the exceptions before you press the deletion button. Any other questions? Yes?
When it comes to ransomware, from an legal perspective, right? You receive the notice, you check if the server is actually encrypted and you don't have the keys. So you don't have to report that. It's not actually a breach, right?
It depends. So the SHIELD Act has changed that. So one of the changes in the SHIELD Act that I didn't mention is the data breach reporting statute in New York used to be an acquisition statute. It dealt with acquisition without valid, unauthorized acquisition or acquisition without valid authorization. I don't know why they said it twice, but acquisition. So folks said, hey, ransomware, they locked it down. They didn't acquire that data. There was no exfiltration. We get that a lot from internal IT or InfoSec folks. There's no exfiltration, so no breach. Well, the SHIELD Act added the word access. Was there access to the data? So show of hands, ransomware, they encrypt your data. Did they access it? Yes, right? They access it. So they care. HIPAA came out with, HHS came out with guidance a couple years ago saying, you know, for those folks who think that encryption of your data in a ransomware incident is not a HIPAA breach, you got to conduct the 4-factor risk analysis to determine whether it is, and in many cases it is. In many cases it isn't, but it really depends. Yes? What word should we use internally for breach if we can't say ham sandwich? I like incident, but incident's difficult if you have contracts that say you have an incident reporting duty. I really don't know, and I haven't seen a good option for something other than incident. Event is out there, but as you all know, the definition of event is any observable occurrence in the network, right? I'm an incident fan. I don't have an answer if your contract's saying that you have incident duties. Right there.
Do you see organizations getting a grace period after a breach that get up to the level of compliance or they should have had? Regulators giving organizations a grace period of any time?
They do. There are 2 grace periods. I'm glad you brought that up because I whizzed through law enforcement. All 50 states say that if you're dealing with law enforcement and it can impede their investigation, you may get a grace period to report. So that's one great reason to deal with law enforcement. On the back end, when regulators call you, when those 12 regulators want you on the phone, yes, they give you time. They ask you, where are your gaps? They want to know, and then they're going to watch how you remediate those gaps. So very rarely is it that they find you immediately. They want to see you get back on your feet, but they've got a different view of things. And addressing those gaps under regulatory surveillance is a very stressful thing to do. Last question. Yes.
Yeah, Paul, similar to what Brian just asked, I'm interested in your thoughts on sort of the memory of safe harbor provision. I know Ohio just passed one that basically said, you know, your obligation or your culpability under the data privacy certification could be kind of safe harbor if you have a legitimate security program and you want to are you starting to see more and more of that, and what are your thoughts on that?
So the question was Ohio SB 220, which is the law that said if you're in compliance with various certain regulatory schemes, PCI DSS, HIPAA, Grammars-Wiley, then that is an affirmative defense to a private right of action. Okay, so it's a very limited carve-out. They say if somebody sues you, you can say, hey, I was compliant, I did enough. And that's great, I like that. But the problem here is we don't have a certification authority. Neither do they have a certification authority in the EU, but that's built into GDPR. They say in the law there that, hey, the data protection agencies can consider validating ISO, for example, as a standard that equals compliance, or may equal compliance. They don't go that far. Unless and until I think we have a certification stamp to say, hey, we did everything, we went to a professional, we got certified, I see diminishing value in those safe harbors, even though legislators are trying to do the right thing in limiting the overlap. Yeah, I'm sure I'm officially over. Thank you very much. Happy to talk to anyone after.